Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. The final day of the college basketball transfer portal. Okay, so if you're just joining us or if you're watching this clip standalone on YouTube, transfer portal closes at, I think, midnight Eastern, 11:59 on Tuesday. And so it's 6:41 Eastern time. We just talked about Boogie Fland. If you missed that, go back and watch it. But what I just want to do is spend a few minutes talking about the big names that are still available, who's potentially available, where they could potentially land, all of that good stuff. And what I do want to do is say a couple things. One, it's 6:41. We still got 5-6 hours. Big names could still enter. So if you missed your favorite player or your favorite player, we'll talk about them. Trust me, we got all spring to talk about the latest developments in the portal. The second thing I would say is a lot of the players that I'm going to mention in the coming minutes are a lot like Boogie Fland. I think they are players that are testing the NBA draft waters with the intention of staying in the NBA draft. But again, it's always subject to change. And with the money floating around in college basketball, I think they'd be remiss not to seriously consider coming back to college if they don't get the guarantee that they're looking for. So it's Tuesday. Portal's about to close. Who is still available? Let's get to some of the big names. A lot of them, by the way, we've talked about, but this is kind of a reset as the portal closes. First one of my favorite players still available, Andrej Stojakovic from Cal. Okay. So we talked about Andrej Stojakovic. He entered the portal last week, began his McDonald's All-American. Let's do the whole thing. McDonald's All-American, Peja's son, began his career at Stanford, didn't really work out. Jared Haas gets fired. He enters the portal last year and lands at Cal. This was the year that he kind of had his breakout, 18 points per game, about 5 rebounds per game. But what's crazy about him is he was one of the best wings in the ACC. And yes, Cal is in the ACC, but I still think there is another level for him to go to. Didn't shoot the ball well. I watched this kid in high school. He's a California kid. Now he's a Northern California kid, but he played AAU with the Compton Magic, so he was in SoCal a lot. I saw him in high school a lot, and he was a kid that was a very good three-point shooter when he was in high school. Not surprising considering the lineage. Only shot 32% from three this year. The other thing I'll say is I think he's a better passer than he's shown in college basketball this year. Averaged just under 2 assists per game this year. Now, part of it is I don't think he was playing for a super talented Cal team this past season. And I think a lot of the reason he didn't shoot well, the reason he didn't pass well, didn't set up a lot of other guys, is he was such a focal point of a game plan. Well, I bring it up because he's available. What's interesting about him, he's maybe the only player on this list, I'll have to go back and check, who has announced he is not declaring for the draft and kind of double dipping. He is playing college basketball this year, and his process is moving along fast, okay? So again, if you see this and he's already committed, don't get mad at Torres, but he is, as we speak, it's Tuesday. He is on a visit to Illinois right now as we speak. Is he going to commit? I don't know. I don't think he knows. I don't think his family knows. But Illinois, obviously, look, Colin Boswell's coming back. They got the Avicic brothers, Tomislav and Big Z are both at Illinois right now. And I think the one thing they're missing is scoring on the wing. They lose Will Riley to the pros. They lose a couple other guys. Obviously, Yakashonis is going pro. He's not a wing. I get that. But they do need to fill that spot, and Stoyakovich is about as good as they come. What will be interesting, some of the other names that have reached out over the course of the last couple days, UNC has reached out. Remember, UNC was one of the finalists a year ago. He entered the portal after his freshman year, goes to Cal. It came down to Cal, UNC, and Kentucky. Kentucky is full. They're obviously out of the mix, but UNC is still very much in the mix. They have Drake Powell. They have Caleb Wood. They have some nice players kind of in that 3-4 spot. You have a chance to bring in a dude that averaged 18 points per game that in your conference, who you also have a history with. I think you got to take advantage of it. So Andrej Stojakovic, North Carolina has reached out. I've seen some rumblings, and we talked about a little bit on Monday's show. UConn has actually reached out. Now, it's very preliminary, but what that says to me, they're doing their homework on the chance that Alex Karaban decides to stay in the NBA draft. We talked about Karaban on Monday night's show. And so I just bring it up because that is another school to watch. They have a history with him. They recruited him out of high school. One thing I'll say, it feels like he is more willing to leave the West Coast from the Bay Area, committed to Stanford. Then he went to Cal. Well, he's visiting Illinois. Again, recruited by North Carolina. We'll see what happens. But I'll tell you what, wherever he ends up, he is going to be a difference maker and a very good player. One of the few players who is technically, again, not even testing the NBA draft water, so he is playing college basketball next year. Let's keep it going. The one name that we really haven't talked about, this is a very interesting player, Cedric Coward from Washington State, okay? So Cedric Coward, I don't even know why we haven't talked about him, probably because he is a player who declared or entered the portal early, but also declared, and for all intents and purposes, it appeared as though he was just going to go pro from Washington State. Well, on Tuesday, it was announced that he has cut his list in college to 2. I believe John Rothstein was the one that had it first. It is down to Alabama and Duke for Cedric Coward. So who is Cedric Coward? 6'7". And like I said, very interesting story. Began his career at the D3 level. Transfers to Eastern Washington. First year, it's an adjustment. Second year, he plays pretty well. I think he was all Big Sky. And then this past year, he goes to Washington State. Averages 17 points and 7 rebounds per game. Now, the catch is he only played in 6 games before he got hurt for the season. So small sample size, but 6'7", crazy long arms, good 3-point shooter. And I'll tell you, he's a guy that will make a difference in college basketball if he comes back next year. And I think it's more likely than maybe it was, I don't know, a month ago that he's going to return to college basketball. You don't cut your list down to 2 if you're not planning on playing college basketball. That's exactly what he's done. And I'll tell you this, is that I think he could be a difference maker at both those schools. Alabama right now probably needs one more guy. I'll tell you this. I think Alabama fans are a little bit more frustrated with Nate Oates than people would think, given they're coming off a Final Four and an Elite Eight. Obviously, Alabama lost a bunch of players graduation. Jaron Stevenson went in the portal. He's at North Carolina. Darrion Reed we'll get into in a minute. They've lost a lot. And so I think, Nate Oates kind of needs another guy. They did add Jaleel Bethea. The other school to watch is Duke. Listen, a little bit of speculation. Kind of think Duke makes a lot of sense. Duke has lost Tyrese Proctor. They've lost the 3 freshmen. Well, Malawach hasn't declared yet, but he will. Malawach, Con Knippel, and Cooper Flagg. They are bringing in the Boozer twins. Right before we got on air, we found out that Isaiah Evans will return, but could probably use like another 6'7", 6'8" wing. So does Cedric Coward make sense there? John Shire, listen, one thing about John Shire, we talk about it with all these coaches. These coaches are not going into next year underprepared or not having a roster that can compete. John Shire just made a Final Four. John Shire coaches at Duke. John Shire isn't just saying, I'm going to rock with Cam Boozer and figure it out. It's like, no, you're going to put really good pieces around him. So we'll see what happens with Cedric Coward, 6'7" forward from Washington State. Producer Matt, I got you Darion Reed late. Let's talk about him really quick. Another one. Oh, look at you, Producer Matt. I didn't know if you had a graphic ready. Look at that. All right, Darion Reed. So I really like Darion Reed. I think we talked about him on one of these updates at some point. They were all running together, but they were all great. But former McDonald's All-American, originally from Georgia, 6'8" forward. And we kind of just talked about him a minute ago, but let's dive in. I thought he was really good early in the year for Alabama. He was a player that had, listen, you go back to the early part of the season, 12 points in a win over Creighton, 11 points in a win at North Carolina, 10 points in a neutral court win over Rutgers. And he was a guy that, that basically was playing like what you would think a McDonald's All-American would. Then he gets hurt, hamstring injury, can't really work out, comes back. The roster's kind of set. The rotations are kind of set. He was, and I'm not blaming him, but he was probably a little bit out of shape. And so he kind of never really finds his way back into the rotation. He ends up hitting the portal. Well, I bring it up. He is in the portal. A couple things. One, did take a visit this week to NC State. Will Wade, I think, is really looking for the first really big splash. Couple nice additions. Matt Abel's kind of a high 4-star kid who Will Wade got committed a few days ago. He's brought a couple kids from McNeese. He's added 1 or 2 other guys, but I think he's looking for that first really big splash. I'm missing somebody. I can't remember who. But I think Darion Reed would be it. I think Darion Reed would be a guy that could go in, play big minutes right away. And if he is as good as people, including me, think he is, then he becomes essentially a quote-unquote one and done at NC State and plays his way into the NBA. He'd be a second-year player, but you get the point. Only thing I'm trying to say is that I think, to me, he is a guy with a lot of upside. NC State was a team that he already took a visit to. Worth noting, he's from Georgia. I think he was linked to Georgia pretty early on in the process. I've been told even like a return to Alabama isn't totally off the table, but Darion Reed, another player that I like. Let's keep it going. PJ Hagerty, we talked a lot about him on Monday night's show. This is the kid, the $4 million price tag. He has said, I want JT Toppin money. But what was more interesting was he said he wants JT Toppin money, but he also wants to play point guard. And we talked about it on Monday's show. I think if you just want $4 million, I'm a believer that somebody can come up with that. I've heard a lot of other people say, there's, all these schools are out of money. And it's like, I don't think most of them are. And I think the one thing that we learn is that for the right guy, you can always kind of find the money, right? You can always find the money, the availability, the this, the that, the whatever. So I bring it up because PJ Hagerty, the issue to me isn't the money. The issue is he's not a point guard. He's 6'2", 6'3", gets to the rim. He doesn't get others involved. I know he had reasonably high assist totals, but he had reasonably high turnover totals as well. And he averaged 21 a game at Tulsa 2 seasons ago, 21 at Memphis this past year. And he's not a point guard. And not only is he not a point guard, it doesn't do you any good to bring him in as a point guard because you take away what he does best, which is score. So to me, I don't think there's a real interesting development since the last time we spoke. I just think that, to me, what else is there to say? I think the only thing that I would really add is that if he's willing to get off the point guard thing, I think there's a spot for him. We talked about, I think Arkansas was interested before he decided to say, tell everybody that he's a point guard. I think there were other schools that were reaching out. Then he says, I'm a point guard. People are like, no, you're not. And certainly not at $4 million. So we talked about it on Monday. I think there's going to have to be some compromise. Ole Miss is a school that has holes to fill. I think, another one that's been a big spender in the past, I'll be curious if they would be this year because they struggled. Kansas State had a huge, amount of money invested in their roster last year. Only bring it up because I think somebody's going to have money for PJ Hagerty if he gets off the point guard thing. Really quickly, 2 last names, and I think these 2 definitely fall into the bucket of they expect to be in the NBA draft, but I am not yet so sure. They are Darrion Williams from Texas Tech and RJ Lewis from St. John's. We'll talk about Darrion Williams first. I mean, listen, at this point, these guys. Darrion Williams, awesome at Texas Tech, 15 points per game, 34% three-point shooter, 6 rebounds, 4 assists, 1.5 steals. Just a low down low. I mean, this was a guy that obviously played very well in the NCAA tournament. I know he missed a couple big shots late against Florida, but it doesn't change the fact that this was a guy that had 23 against Florida in that Elite Eight game, 20 against Arkansas, 28 against Drake in the round of 32. And he's an interesting player because he's a 6'6" power forward. And I know he can stretch the floor, but to me, listen, I'm not a huge NBA guy. But I watch the playoffs. I don't see a lot of 6'4" men without super athleticism in the NBA right now. And so to me, he's one, again, by all intents and purposes, go through the draft process. But if somebody's going to offer you $2.5 or $3 million to come back and play college basketball next year, why would you not? I don't get it. Doesn't make sense to me. Maybe he doesn't want to be in college anymore, whatever. But if somebody's going to pay you I keep saying it. If somebody's going to pay me $2.5 million to come back to college, even if I don't like school, I'm coming back. I'm playing basketball. I'm getting a bunch of C's and D's, and I'm cashing paychecks, baby. Okay. So I don't understand this idea of, he wants to be a pro. He has eligibility. He's going to make better money in college. So we'll see what happens from there. I think the same goes for RJ Lewis. RJ Lewis, we know the backstory. Benched in the NCAA tournament, and a guy that averaged 18 points per game, 7 rebounds per game. He was the Big East Player of the Year. And again, when he decided to transfer, it was, of course, interesting because it was right after the benching. What did it mean? Pitino basically said he's done everything he can do here. And I think the intention is he's going to go pro. But you're going to be a second-round pick. Somebody offers you 2.5 to come there, you're going to do it. By the way, should mention some of the schools, like I said, that I think have some money to spend at this point. I think Florida for the right guard is going to have money because, again, they had $1 million slotted for Denzel Aberdeen that he said, I'll take more at Kentucky. But they have, I think, money to burn, and they don't have enough guards right now. So I think that's a place to look. Ole Miss, I keep saying it. Chris Beard, remember, Chris Beard got extra NIL money as part of turning down Texas A&M to come back to Ole Miss. Well, Chris Beard's a guy. You think that guy's going into next year without a team that's good enough to win? Right now, they're very thin. They have AJ Storr. They don't really have much else. Tennessee, as I keep saying, I think needs another player or two to be a real factor. I think Auburn would probably take the right guy. I think Auburn's actually in pretty good shape at this point. I think Kansas needs another guy or two. So I just bring it up because, by the way, I think Duke still needs a guy or two. Now, Isaiah Evans certainly helps, but I think they need a guy or two to get out of here.